Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you if you are new to the study. I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin. It's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we are looking at the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Habakkuk, chapter 2, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day has been going well. Pray that your week's been going well so far. Happy Tuesday. Good to be with you here again this evening as we continue our journey through the Bible, one chapter at a time. And we are now in the book of Habakkuk, looking tonight at chapter 2, just 3 chapters to this short book. Last night we started with an introduction, and we looked at these questions that Habakkuk was asking of the Lord. And just to recap, this is a time before the exile, before the Babylonians came in, invaded the southern kingdom, Judah, and took the people of Judah into exile. So this is a prophecy before that all took place. And Habakkuk is asking God 2 questions. The first question was, Lord, how long do we have to watch this injustice taking place among our people? That the powerful were taking advantage of the weak, that there was a lot of injustice, a lot of deception, ripping people off, just not good. They were not loving their neighbor as themselves. They were not loving their brothers and sisters as they should have. And we saw in chapter 1 God's response to that question, how he's going to respond to this injustice by the people of Judah is he's going to send the Babylonians in to invade and defeat this kingdom and take the people into exile. That led Habakkuk to ask a second question. How is this possible? How can a just and a holy God who cannot look upon sin and injustice look favorably upon these Babylonians who were evil to come in and decimate the land of Judah? That was the second question. And so now tonight in chapter 2, we're going to see God's response to that question. And God's going to give a full answer to Habakkuk here, a full reply about why and how he's using the Babylonians in such a way to judge the Israelites. So, short chapter tonight, but a lot of good information. So let's get right into it here. Open up your Bibles to the second chapter of Habakkuk. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, we put all the verses right up here on the screen for you, and we're going to start verses 1 through 3, provide a introduction to God's answer to Habakkuk. So it starts out with Habakkuk speaking on his behalf. Verse 1, I will stand at my watch, and I will station myself on the ramparts, and I will look to see what he will say to me, and what answer I am to give to this complaint. So Habakkuk here, he's comparing himself to a sentry, to a sentinel on a city wall who's watching the horizon for the approach of this enemy, the approach of a horseman, the Babylonians. And the wording here, standing, I will stand at my watch, that describes the posture of a servant awaiting his instruction from his master. The figure of a watchman in this context is used symbolically to describe a prophet. This is very common in Old Testament writing. So the implication here is this is a prophet waiting for God's response and waiting so that he can respond to God's response. So Habakkuk is he's watching, he's waiting expectantly for God to reply to this question. That's what this is all about. God, how can you allow these Babylonians to do this? And now he's waiting for the response, just as he waited for God's response to the first question that we saw in chapter 1. Why is he waiting for a response? Well, it's so he can report back to the people what is going on. And so Habakkuk, he's standing watch. He's preparing himself for God's reply, for this discussion with the Lord about this situation with the Babylonians and this reply from God, which he is expecting to come in a vision or a dream. Verse 2, and then the Lord replied. So here's God's response back to this question of how can you allow the Babylonians to do this? The Lord replied, write down the revelation, right? Write down this vision, this oracle that I'm going to give you. Make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. So God's going to respond. And he's telling Habakkuk, write it down. What you're about to see, write it down. An easy to record version of this vision. Write it on a tablet. Write it on stone or this clay, whatever it is. Write it down. And write it down in such a way that it is plain to anyone, however occupied they are, or even to those who are going to be in haste, right? So that a herald may run with it. So having received and recorded this vision, Habakkuk should then run and tell the other citizens of Judah what God's response is. Verse 3. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove to be false. The vision that Habakkuk is about to receive from God concerns events that are going to take place in the future. Though it linger, next verse, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. So it's a prophecy that is coming in the future. It's not going to come to pass immediately, but it will be fulfilled eventually. And so Habakkuk is to wait for the fulfillment because it's going to come, and it's going to come at God's appointed time. Now, the writer of the book of Hebrews, and we don't know for certain who wrote Hebrews. We often attribute it to Paul because it falls right in the middle of all of Paul's letters, but Hebrews, we don't know for sure who wrote that book, but the writer quoted this verse in Hebrews 10:37. And he uses this verse from Habakkuk to encourage his readers or her readers, whoever wrote Hebrews, to persevere in their commitment to Jesus Christ, because what God had predicted was going to eventually come to pass, which in the context of the Hebrews was the return of Christ. So in the context of Habakkuk, wait for God's reply, it's going to come. In the context of Hebrews, quoting this verse from Habakkuk, wait patiently and expectantly because Jesus is going to return. And this verse in Habakkuk, it's associated with Jewish tradition with the coming of Messiah. So there's a lot going on here in this verse in Habakkuk that God is giving to him. Wait expectantly. It's going to come in the time following Christ's resurrection. The writer of the Hebrews quotes it and says, Jesus' return is going to come. So this sets us up for this response from God. And now we're going to see God's indictment of Babylon. And so having prepared Habakkuk for the answer, God is now going to give it. And what follows is that revelation. So verse 4, see, or behold, or look, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. So Babylon was not right in doing what they did. They were puffed up with pride. They were puffed up with evil passions. And in contrast, the righteous person would live by his or her faith. And by implication, Babylon, who is the unrighteous one, was not going to live because they did not live by faith. They did not trust in God. They lived by sight and might, right? That's where their trust was at, was in power. They sought to gratify their own ambitions by running over other people rather than submitting to the sovereignty of God. And this verse appears in the New Testament as well. It appears 3 times in the New Testament. And you can look this up. Paul quotes this to his letter to the church in Rome in chapter 1. He emphasizes the righteous. Paul uses this again in his letter to the church in Galatia, Galatians 3:11. And he uses this verse to stress live. The writer of the Hebrews uses this verse in Hebrews 10:38. The emphasis is on faith. So this verse is quoted quite a bit in the New Testament, but different emphasis, right? Paul used it to emphasize righteousness and to emphasize life or live. The writer of Hebrews used it to emphasize faith. Faith that God was going to reward the righteous so that they would live. This is the key verse in Habakkuk here, verse 4, because it contrasts the difference between the proud Babylonians and their destruction with the humble faith of the Israelites and their eventual deliverance. God, how can you allow this to happen? And God is outlining his plan for Habakkuk. This is why. Because these proud Babylonians are going to be judged as well. But the humble, faithful Israelite is going to be redeemed. I will deliver them. The whole issue here is trusting in God. Verse 5. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant. He is never at rest. God is taking this thought in verse 4 even further. And what he's saying here is that when a person drinks too much, especially too much wine, it leads that person to become proud, right? They become a little different when they are inebriated with wine. It's arrogance. And what's personified here is the arrogance of Babylon. The Babylonians were known for being great consumers of wine. Wine, it often makes a person, aside from sometimes that feel-good feeling, it will sometimes make people feel dissatisfied with their possessions, with their life, with their situation. And that person will often try to run away and find help somewhere else. So that's what it means. The wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest. The proud Babylonian, never going to find satisfaction anywhere. Next verse. Because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death, he is never satisfied. The proud person is never satisfied, always seeking for something else. And like death, that proud person will never find fulfillment. Pride consumes people. It never stops. And that's what that means. And death here, or Sheol, or the grave, Babylon is similar to this place of eternal death, Sheol. Death is opening its jaws wide in order to consume the Babylonian proud people, just as Babylon opens up its mouth wide to consume other nations. Next verse. He gathers himself to all the nations. He takes captive, he being Babylon, all the people. So the proud person also seeks to dominate other people. And that too was a mark of Babylon. So these were the evidences of Babylon's pride. And this is all the basis for God's indictment of this nation. Habakkuk asks, how can you do this? How are you allowing this to happen? You are a holy God. How can you allow this evil to run rampant? And God gives them the answer. I'm going to judge them. I'm going to judge them more harshly than I'm judging the people of Judah because of their pride. And now in verses 6 through 20, we see the sentence. So God is going to pronounce these mocking statements, these taunts, announcing to them they are going to receive judgment for their sins. So this, I had mentioned Habakkuk's writing is often in poetry. There's some taunt song, and this is a taunt song, and it consists of 5 stanzas, 3 verses in each stanza. And what we're going to see here is this word woe. 5 woes are going to follow. Each woe is an interjection of distress that is pronounced in the face of disaster. It's coming judgment upon the Babylonians. So the first woe, judgment for their exploitation. So verse 6, will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. So because the Babylonians' sins, because of those, it's inevitable that the righteous are going to ridicule the Babylonians. They're going to pronounce woe on them for increasing what was theirs just to have more, right? It's a gluttonous situation for the Babylonians. They made themselves rich by charging exorbitant interest on loans that they made. They were gaining wealth by oppression and by fraud. And that is what is in view here in this first taunt. Woe to him who piles up stolen goods. How long must this go on, right? How long is this going to continue? This is the righteous asking of themselves. When's God going to stop this is the question. When's he going to judge Babylon? Verse 7. Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? And then you will become their prey. So those from whom Babylon had stolen were going to rise up and rebel when they wake up to the fact of what's really going on. And when that happens, they would turn the tables on Babylon, and they in turn would plunder the Babylonians. This happened when the Persians and the Medes came together and rose up and overthrew Babylon in 539 BC. Verse 8, because you have plundered many nations, the people who are left will plunder you. So Babylon's going to suffer the same punishment that it had inflicted on all these other nations. They will be looted because they had looted many others. Next verse, for you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. So Babylon had pillaged, and that pillaging involved human bloodshed and violence and destruction. And it had all come upon the land of Canaan, into the city of Jerusalem, into the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and into the land of Judah. And that was all going to come back upon them as their judgment. That's the first woe. Now we see the second, which is this judgment for this self-exaltation, verses 9 through 11. So here's the second woe. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting up his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. So Babylon used all of its acquisitions, its plundering, to build a very secure government for itself that it thought was going to be safe and secure from any calamity. It had built this strong, rich dynasty so that they would be self-sufficient. They were saving to protect themselves. That in itself is not wrong, but they did it in such a way that they had oppressed other people to get to that point, and they did it so that they would not have to trust in God at all. They had the wrong attitude. Saving up to protect yourself is not in and of itself wrong. It was their heart was in, we don't need anybody. We are self-sufficient. It was their pride. That was their sin. Verse 10, you have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house, forfeiting your life. It was shameful for the Babylonians to destroy all these many other peoples, because by doing so, they were sinning against themselves. In other words, they were doing something that eventually is going to bring destruction on themselves. By doing all this killing of others, it was bringing this judgment on them that was going to bring them down. Verse 11, and the stones of the walls will cry out, the beams of the woodwork will echo the cries. So the stones and the woodwork, where did that all come from? Came from all these other nations. When the Babylonians went in and plundered, they didn't just take treasure, they took materials back with them, things that they could use to strengthen their own fortifications. They built huge fortresses and palaces, and it all served as witness to these sinful invasions by bringing these materials of these defeated cities back to Babylon and using those to strengthen their own fortifications. And by doing that, it testifies to the guilt of the Babylonians in the day of the Lord when God brings this judgment upon Babylon. So that's the second woe. Now we come to the third, and this judgment is for oppression. Verse 12, woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. So the Babylonians, they could expect distress because they had built their cities at the expense of the lives of their enemies. This is talking about blood money, money that is obtained by making others suffer, even shedding their blood. Babylon was built with blood money. It was built with the blood, sweat, and tears of other people taken captive. The main town of Babylon itself was built on injustice. Without injustice, it wouldn't have become what it had become. That's what this is all about. They had built themselves up on blood money. And now because of that, they're going to be judged. Verse 13, has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? This is a taunt song, and this verse is right in the center of it in terms of its structure. And this verse is significant in that it focuses on the Lord Almighty, the Lord of armies, the Lord of hosts, the judge, the executioner. All this hard work by the Babylonians was in vain. All their labor would amount to nothing. All their works would just turn out to be fuel for the fire that would burn them up, the fire of the judgment of God. Verse 14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just as the waters cover the sea. So rather than the earth being filled with the glory of Babylon, it's going to be filled with the glory of the Lord, just as the expanse of the waters cover the sea, so too would God's glory cover the land. Not Babylon's glory, God's glory. Now this too has yet to come to pass. This speaks of an end-time future when Jesus returns for his 1,000-year reign. And again, this is the centerpiece of these 5 woes. It's not only the center of the book of Habakkuk, it's right in the center of this taunt song, these oracles. Verse 15, here we see the 4th woe. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin until they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. So God's going to judge Babylon because the Babylonians had deceived their neighbor nations, all with the result that they took advantage of their neighbor nations. They behaved like someone who got someone else so drunk that they lost all inhibition. The implication here is that the Babylonians took advantage of their victims sexually. Verse 16, and you will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. So just as they made their neighbors drink and became drunk and uninhibited and took advantage of them, so God's going to give them drink from the cup of his judgment, that they would become drunk on God's judgment. In the next verse, the cup from the Lord's right hand, which is a symbol of power, authority, is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. God's right hand is a figure for his strong personal retribution, giving back in kind what that person was giving to others. And so now, having drunk of the contents of this cup of wrath, the Babylonians are going to be disgraced. They would disgrace themselves rather than glorifying themselves, as we saw they had just been doing. They would expose not the nakedness of someone else, they would expose their own nakedness. And verse 17, and the violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you, for you have shed human blood, you have destroyed land and cities and everyone in them. This ethical, moral injustice through this violence from Babylon was going to come back on them to the point that it overwhelmed them. And the implication here is they had stripped the lands of their vegetation, in particular Lebanon, and had stripped the land of the animals. The bloodshed here, the slaughter of the inhabitants, the people, the animals, the stripping of the land, very serious crime of injustice. And Lebanon here isn't just a location. This is synonymous for all of Israel. It represents all the peoples. In particular, it's focusing in on Jerusalem and the people of Jerusalem. And then we see this judgment for idolatry in verses 18 through 20. And this is the final judgment. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? So Habakkuk, like the other prophets, saw the foolishness of idol worship, and here is exposing it. What good is it? You're making something with human hands, which means it can't help you. Something that a maker creates cannot help its creator. Anyone who creates is always greater than their creation. And that's what Habakkuk is saying. You can fashion these wooden or metal or whatever idols, but they are not going to help you. It's an image. It's a teacher of falsehood. And what is being implied here is that you are foolish for thinking these idols that you created with your hands are going to help you. Next verse, for the one who makes this idol trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that can't speak. So this idol maker trusts in his own handiwork, that it's going to help him. But these idols couldn't speak, much less provide any type of help. And so Habakkuk is saying, this is ridiculous, what you are buying into. And here comes the fifth woe. So woe to him who says to the wooden idol, come to life, or speaks to lifeless stone and says, wake up. Can this idol give any guidance? It's covered with gold and silver, but there's no life in it. There's no breath in it. God pronounces this woe on those who ignorantly try to coax these wood, stone, mute idols overlain with gold and silver, speak, right? Speak to us. No matter what they look like or what material was used or what they were made out of, they were still lifeless objects of art. And how foolish it was to look upon these things as a guide or as a teacher. And then verse 20, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. In contrast to these lifeless idols in a man made temple, is the living and true God in his holy temple. God dwells in his holy heavenly temple. He is not the works of some human hand. He's not fashioned by human hands. He doesn't dwell in a human made temple. He doesn't lie hidden under gold and silver as these idols of Babylon did. He reigns in heaven. He fills heaven. He gives aid to his people, unlike these false idols who couldn't give aid to anybody. And so, therefore, all the earth and everything in it should be still, be quiet before the Lord out of awe and reverence and respect. And what this is saying is there's no need to try to coax God to come out of his holy temple and come to life and speak. God's majesty, his sovereignty is beyond us summoning him. And this whole chapter to Habakkuk is God's going to take care of Babylon. You, Habakkuk, and you Israelites, you don't have to concern yourself with this. I'm going to take care of it. I'm the Lord. I'm the Lord Almighty, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies, and I will handle this situation. And that is Habakkuk chapter 2, and I pray that that has been a help to you. Tomorrow we'll conclude this short book of Habakkuk. We'll look at chapter 3, which closes with a hymn. It's a hymn of praise of God by Habakkuk. The book started with doom and gloom. It's going to end with praise and exaltation. So thank you for being here this evening. Again, I do pray that this has been a help to you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe and stay healthy. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care and God bless. Bye-bye.